On June 15th, 2004, a man named John Paul Chapman is arrested for possession of meth, weed, obstruction, and possession of drug paraphernalia. But the guy in the chair in front of police wasn't John Paul Chapman. He was a 32-year-old man who'd raped and murdered for the past 12 years without ever being caught or going to jail. Some would say he was charismatic and handsome. Others have dubbed him the poor man's Ted Bundy. He was a liar and an addict, but more importantly, he was a killer. This is Jeremy Bryan Jones and his killer charm. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Everybody.
Yes, welcome. Willkommen.
Willkommen.
I have no idea why I did that. It's the only thing I could think of so quickly.
You're going to have to start. We always say you're going to have to start coming up with new ways.
I
You're
know.
going to have to think about it beforehand before you sit down in that chair.
I'll do some research this week.
Okay. Wherever you're listening, be sure to like, rate, and review the podcast. That helps other people to find us. We're getting tremendous downloads.
Yes,
it seems
we are.
like you guys are telling all your friends about Hitched to Homicide. We love that.
Yep.
While you're telling them, make sure they go join the Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws.
Yes.
And we have lots of fun in there. We post all kinds of good information in there. Last week I was posting pictures of an unsolved case and all the phone numbers of all the detectives where you can call and you can be a crime stopper.
Nobody's gotten that $200,000 yet.
Yeah, there was a reward with that one for $200,000.
Yep.
So if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and do it. We're getting a tremendous amount of downloads. It's just amazing. You guys must be telling your friends and family because we don't really advertise this podcast, but
Right.
we might be stepping into that soon.
Yep.
Just to get some more people on board.
Yep.
A big thanks today for listener Mary Ritchie, who is an in-law and outlaw, for suggesting this case. If you want to suggest a case, go to hitchedtohomicide.com. There's a drop-down menu. All you have to do is fill out the form and send it in. This is a really interesting case this week. I actually saw a documentary on it and then thought, before I finish watching this documentary, I've got a name now. This is interesting. I need to go start digging. And I did. And I have a ton of sources for this podcast. And here we go. Here they are.
Okay.
Serial Killer Calendar, Murderpedia, ThoughtCo.com, AI.com, CaseLaw.com, Marie Claire, the magazine, Human Monsters, NBC News, Joplin Globe, The Oklahoman, Reddit, WickedWe.com, Wikipedia, ccadp.proboards.com, which is a little bit like Reddit, the Town Talk newspaper, May 28th, 2005, the Atlanta Constitution, October 9th, 2004, the Selma Times Journal, January 30th, 2005, and the book AKA Oklahoma, Life of Serial Killer Jeremy Jones by Jack Smith.
Okay, I have to ask though, what is the serial killer's calendar?
It's a website.
Oh, okay.
So like you thought it was like a...
Yeah, I was going to get on Amazon and see if I could
like
find
the firefighters of New York City
Yeah,
calendar.
exactly.
Of course, that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, no.
Okay.
No, it's a website. So go check it out. And also, one more time, I just want to say the book is AKA Oklahoma, Life of Serial Killer Jeremy Jones by Jack Smith. I will have links to that and all of these sources in the show notes. Here we go. Jeremy Bryan Jones is born on April 12, 1973 in Miami, Oklahoma, which is at the northeast corner of Oklahoma where Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas meet.
Okay.
They all kind of, those little four, it's like a little quilt right there in the corner.
Yeah.
His mother is Janine Beard, different husband. She had a different husband by the time she's raising him. And she herself is going to be arrested 32 years after Jeremy is born. There's not a whole lot about his childhood or his younger years, except one of his attorneys will later tell the court that Jeremy had a horrible upbringing. Here's what I know about his mother. When she's arrested in 2005, along with Jeremy's half-brother, Jesse, who was 17 years old at the time, the police find scales, weed pipes, weed brownies, residue of crystal meth on scales, and 23 weapons, including a .25 caliber Derringer that is found between the mattresses in her bedroom.
Wow.
That's his mom.
Jeez.
So I don't know what Jeremy's young life was like, but I'll let you listeners ponder on that one.
Yeah.
I couldn't find any information about his biological father or his stepfather. My guess is that he grew up in a household of drug dealers.
Yeah, if mom's got that kind of stash, you can pretty much guess that.
Yeah, I don't know when that started happening. I didn't research her.
Right.
I mean, she's part of the story just a little bit,
Sure.
but he's definitely a mama's boy. I'll tell you that from the get-go.
Okay.
He's a good-looking guy. He's about 5'8", 140, brown hair, brown eyes. I mean, I will post pictures of him in the In-Laws and Outlaws, but he's a decent-looking guy.
Right.
When Jeremy is 16, he gets into a fight with a boy at school. The other boy's mom comes to pick her son up at school, and she can see Jeremy and her son having a fist fight. And this woman's son is getting his ass handed to him. And so she gets out of her car. She tries to break up the fight, and you'd think that that would end it. They're 16. You know, a parent jumps in. It's time for everything to end.
Right.
No. Jeremy proceeds to fight the mom. He started punching the mother.
Good Lord.
He would be charged with assault and sent to juvie for a little stint. And after that, Jeremy attends Quapaw High School. He's known to be a troublemaker. He fights with his teachers, verbally sparring with them, not beating them up like parents.
Right.
But he yells at them. He causes a lot of trouble and mayhem in the classroom. But outside the classroom and in the hallways of the high school, Jeremy has a loyal following of people. He's a leader. He's got this little clique of kids, and as a smooth talker and an accomplished charmer, he was able to get his little minions to follow him fairly blindly. Jeremy liked to smoke weed. He did it pretty often. Maybe he was trying to escape his home life. Who can say? I read that the girls in the high school really thought he was handsome and quite beguiling.
No, he was the bad boy.
Yeah, he's got lots of friends, but he does have a dark secret. He's been dabbling in meth.
Ooh.
Even though he's been smoking weed, even in high school, he has started to dabble in meth. And he started going on benders in high school where he was paranoid and experiencing hallucinations. And Jeremy would end up dropping out of high school.
Okay.
He would never finish. May 11th, 1992, Jeremy's 18 years old. There's no structure at home, no more structure in his life from school. He's aimlessly drifting through his life already. And on this day, on May 11th, Jeremy crosses paths with Jennifer Judd. Jennifer Diane Bryan Judd was born on December 27th, 1971. She's 20 years old and a newlywed. Her husband was Justin and an old classmate and neighbor of Jeremy Jones. They lived next door to each other. Jennifer and Justin lived in a duplex in Baxter Springs, Kansas, and had just gotten married 9 days earlier on May 2nd, 1992. Jennifer's parents are Dale and Debbie, and she has a sister, Amanda. And that morning, Jennifer left home because she had an appointment at the tanning salon. And she had a day of running errands planned, including dropping off lunch to her husband at his chemical plant where he worked before she started her shift at a local convenience store. Because Justin had called Jennifer around 9:30 that morning and said, hey, I've walked out the door. I've left my lunch. And she's like, yeah, honey, I'll bring it to you.
Okay.
I mean, they've only been married 9 days.
Sure.
Of course she's going to bring him his lunch. 29 days later, she might be like, go get your own lunch. No, I'm kidding.
You
I'm
moron.
kidding.
Why'd you forget your lunch?
Why'd you forget your lunch? 29 years later. Sorry. Come get your own lunch. Jennifer had talked to a friend at 9:52 that morning, and law enforcement believes that she left for the tanning bed, then remembered that she needed to return a rental video and headed back to the couple's duplex to retrieve it. And Justin's lunch is sitting in the passenger side of Jennifer's car. And at some point during her quick return home, she encountered Jeremy. Her keys were found on the living room floor. He beat her, choked her, stabbed her 6 times in the chest, 3 times in the back, using a knife from her own kitchen. And the time of death is believed to have been around 10:30 a.m. Now, later that day at 2:45 p.m., Justin returns home along with a friend of his who happened to be the best man at Jennifer and his wedding. And his name is Charles Craig Chance, or Chuck. His name is Chuck Chance.
Chuck Chance.
Chuck Chance. You know what? Writers sit for hours trying to come up with a perfect name for a character. Yeah. And this guy's name is Chuck Chance.
Chuck Chance.
They encounter Jennifer's lifeless body, according to her father. They walk in, and there's her dead body. And in the months leading up to her murder, Jennifer was scared of someone. She didn't want to be left alone at the convenience store she worked at in Pitcher, Oklahoma. She always wanted someone to follow her home. Also, she told a friend that shortly before her murder, a person stood outside their duplex and pounded on her door. And so she was scared, and she hid behind the couch in her home at that time. But her spidey senses are up. She feels like something's happening. Something's going on. Yeah. Somebody's watching her. That morning, it was the first time she left home alone since these two were married. Jennifer's keys were found on the living room floor. She was not bound. There was no evidence of a sexual assault, but authorities think she may have been put in some sort of chokehold because she had defense wounds to both of her hands. Her body was found face up. She had bruising around her neck. It was likely that she was taken by surprise from behind, stabbed in the back in the beginning of the attack. And like I said, the knife came from her own kitchen. Jennifer's husband, Justin, later said that he thought that this was somebody who was infuriated with his wife over the wedding, that the wedding had sent this person into a jealous rage. And authorities questioned Chuck Chance for 16 hours. And then he was released. I don't know why they thought the best man was the killer, but there was nothing at the crime scene that linked him to the murder. Chuck Chance will spend some time in jail later in his life. But Jennifer's family hired a PI, a private investigator, to look into the case, and they seemed to think that Chuck had something to do with this murder of Jennifer. But Justin was cleared of any involvement, and this will go unsolved for years.
Wow.
3 years later, Jeremy is arrested on rape and possession of meth charges. During a meth-fueled rampage, he held a woman at gunpoint, but he didn't hold the gun to her head. He held the gun to her vagina.
Oh, jeez.
Screaming that he was going to end her life.
Wow.
Then he raped her, but allowed her to live. But as he's being charged with one rape, he's suddenly connected to a second rape charge. These two rapes happened a year apart in January of 1995 and January of 1996. And also in 1996, he's picked up on battery charges of a third woman.
Wow.
Now, you'd think that at this point, Jeremy's going to jail.
Well, probably not.
Jeremy's going to breeze right through all of this. After he speaks with officials, he convinces them that he's a really good candidate for a program that is focused solely on young offenders. So instead of going to prison, Jeremy is headed to the Dick Connor Correctional Center for evaluation.
So he's a charmer that can talk anybody into anything.
He seems to think so, and he does seem to get by with some things. But I've read quotes from this knucklehead, and I don't know how he's charming.
Right. And what's his age at this time?
He's 19.
19, okay.
This is where the so-called smooth talking came into play. He tells him that he's a deeply troubled young man, that he had great remorse for his actions. He tells him that it's all because of drugs, and I don't doubt that in the slightest.
Right.
I don't doubt that in the slightest, that in his meth-fueled benders, that was all a part of his rapes and murders. But still, it doesn't make him right.
Right. No, it was his choice to do the meth.
But Jeremy tells them he wants to be rehabilitated. I want to be saved. He tells them that he's the guy who can be a success. He can be the poster boy. I can be the guy you can point to and say, look at what he's done. Look who he is now. And after that, the evaluation team decides that if Jeremy could just shake his drug habit, he would become a productive member of society.
Right.
So he doesn't go to jail. He goes to this program instead. His mom, who of course is going to be later arrested on drug dealing and weapons charges, she's a character witness for him through all this. She tells the evaluation group that Jeremy is a good boy who had fallen on hard times and needed to get his shit together. I'm paraphrasing. But she also tells him that Jeremy will have a strong family standing behind him when he's released, and they will help him stay out of trouble.
Well, he's doomed from the beginning.
Yeah, so they decide to give Jeremy a shot at this. And all while he's lying to these people, as is she, he tells them that he's a high school graduate. He's actually a dropout. He tells him that he's never been in trouble before. Lies, lies, lies. But it all keeps him out of jail for the 2 rapes and the assaults.
Amazing.
He's thoroughly impressed his handlers at the correctional facility and is out on 5 years probation for the rape and assault charges. Now, can you imagine if you were his victim of rape?
Yeah.
And he's out on probation for 5 years.
I know.
2 rapes and 1 assault. It's crazy.
I'd lose my mind.
He pled no contest to the rape and the assault charges. The terms of his plea deal meant that he had to submit his DNA to a database, and he had to go back to the Dick Connor Center for group therapy. So he's literally out. He just has to go back for therapy.
That's crazy.
But Jeremy really hated group therapy.
Wah.
He said he was required to go to these, and they were sex offender workshops that he was being forced to go to.
Yeah.
And he tells his mom that he hated it when the other members discussed their problems, and he called them, quote, a bunch of perverts, end quote.
Okay.
He causes such a ruckus that he's actually booted out of the class.
Wow.
So 5 years probation, he's supposed to go to these classes. Now he's even been kicked out of this class.
So he doesn't stay within the parameters of what he's supposed to be doing, and they still let him go.
And they're not holding his feet to the flame.
Wow.
January 1996, Grove, Oklahoma. Local couple Daniel Oakley and his girlfriend Doris Harris, their mobile home is ablaze in rural Delaware County, Oklahoma, near Afton. Doris Harris met her boyfriend Danny in the late summer of 1996. Doris was from Joplin, Missouri, and Danny lived about 20 minutes south of the city of Miami, Oklahoma, in a trailer park off of Grand Lake.
Okay.
About 3 months into the relationship, the two get very serious, and Doris spent more and more time with Danny, not coming home for days at a time. Eventually, Doris's sister, Paula Barnett, took in Doris's teenage daughter, and she felt Doris wasn't looking after her. So Paula didn't really approve of the relationship and what it was doing to Doris. She told the Miami News Record on June 5th, 2005 that, quote, my sister's whole personality changed about 3 months prior to her death. She wasn't motherly. She let her bills go. She became self-centered. She was not dependable, end quote.
Okay.
And that's because Danny and Doris are doing drugs. In the same article, Paula mentioned that in late February, Doris told her that, quote, things will be better in a few days. You just don't understand. Danny's mixed up with the Mexican mafia, end quote.
Jeez.
And Paula didn't take her very seriously. I mean, who's mixed up with the Mexican mafia in the middle of rural Oklahoma?
Yeah, but if our daughter came to us and said, you know, my boyfriend's mixed up with the Mexican mafia, I'd at least entertain the idea. Gee whiz. I'm just saying.
Yeah, everything should be in the realm of possibility.
Well, yeah.
And minor crime and drug use is no secret in Miami, Oklahoma. And Paula didn't think organized crime was a real threat, right? Just like we said. But Paula didn't know at the time that Danny was indeed mixed up with some dangerous people.
Okay.
One of Danny's associates, Denny Ray Honeycutt, was a local drug kingpin. On January 7th of 1996, he pulled a gun on another associate and threatened to kill them if they wouldn't pay their debt. And later that night, he would be arrested when Officer Raines of Glenpool, Oklahoma, spotted Honeycutt driving erratically on the road. Officer Raines turned on his dash cam and body microphone, then turned on his lights, signaling for the car to pull over. The car pulled to the shoulder, but then took time to slow down, indicating to Officer Raines that they may have been stalling to hide something inside.
Yeah, think?
And when Officer Raines asked Honeycutt to produce his license and insurance, he didn't have the insurance, and the car didn't belong to him. Honeycutt and his passengers gave the officer different answers for the destination that night, and the passengers appeared extremely nervous. And Officer Raines called in a canine unit, and they started searching the vehicle, and they found .22 caliber ammunition and extensive financial records, along with a bag of methamphetamine. And officers finished searching the vehicle and found, quote, a knife between the seats and a loaded .44 Magnum revolver on the console. At the police station, officers recovered several additional weapons, narcotics, digital scales, ammunition, drug dealing records, a police scanner, and used and unused syringes.
That's a lot of stuff.
Now, just a month and a half later, on February 21st, 1996, around 8:10 or 8:15 in the morning, Danny's neighbors see a strange man who they would later identify as Honeycutt getting into Danny's car. And Police Chief Gail Wells said, quote, neighbors saw him put a long long gun, either a shotgun or a rifle, into a case and place it inside a brown, early 1980s four-door Oldsmobile, end quote. Just minutes later, around 8:30 a.m., neighbors call the Hickory Grove Volunteer Fire Department to report smoke coming from Danny's trailer. Firefighters were able to get into the home while only part of it was in flames, and they found Danny Oakley and Doris Harris in their bed, already dead from gunshot wounds to the head.
Wow.
They both had methamphetamine in their systems. They'd both been shot to death, and then their home was set on fire. So when the officer actually pulls over Denny Honeycutt and they find all this ammunition in the car, I just told you the story about this guy, this drug kingpin.
Right.
The car that he is driving is Danny's. He's actually driving Danny's car.
Danny, not Denny.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Exactly.
All right.
Yes. He's driving Danny Oakley's car.
Got it.
Denny Honeycutt is driving Danny Oakley's car. And they're both tied into drugs because both Danny and his girlfriend Doris had methamphetamine in their system.
Got it.
Even though they'd been shot and burned.
Right.
But these murders of Danny and Doris are going to go unsolved. Even though they find him in the car, there's nothing that links him to the murders.
Right.
Immediately. September 11th, 1999, 19-year-old Justin D. Hutchings is found dead on a street in Pitcher, Oklahoma. He's overdosed. Or has he? Because Justin's family's pretty shocked that his death was caused by an overdose of meth. Justin was shown as a, quote, fairly well-heeled young man, end quote. He wasn't known for being into drugs, and his family thinks that it's really suspicious, and they think that foul play was at hand. Police, however, say it's just another kid who's taken too soon by drugs.
Sure.
We're sorry to your family. Case closed.
Right.
3 months later, it's December 29th, 1999. High school friends Laria Bible and Ashley Freeman are spending the night together to celebrate Ashley's 16th birthday.
Okay.
Laria had received permission from her parents to spend the night at the Freeman's home. Earlier that day, the girls had spent some time at a local pizza place with Freeman's mother, Kathy. They would be joining Ashley's dad, Danny, later.
No, another Danny.
Another Danny. I'm so sorry.
Danny, Denny, and Danny. Okay.
Now, the Freemans were the type of family that even in their rural community were considered interesting because the Freemans lived off the land. They hunted their own food. They chopped their own firewood. They even got their own water. And even Ashley was a really good hunter, their daughter. And Ashley and Laria met at 4-H Club, and they shared an interest in farming and hunting. Now, the next morning around 6 a.m., the Freeman's home is engulfed in flames. And when the fire is put out, the bodies of Danny and Kathy Freeman, Ashley's parents, are discovered in their burned mobile home. An accelerant had been placed near the home's wood-burning stove. Both Danny and Kathy Freeman had been shot in the head, and Laria's car was still parked in front of the Freeman's house with her keys in the ignition. Her purse, which contained money, was found in the rubble. And Ashley and Laria are gone.
Oh.
The two 16-year-old girls are missing.
Right.
And here's what's believed to have happened. In the early morning of December 30th, 1999, someone visited the Freeman home either to sell drugs to one of the parents or to settle a drug debt when Ashley and Laria unexpectedly walked in on the whole thing.
Okay.
These girls have not been found. This case is unsolved.
Really?
Meanwhile, Jeremy is failing to meet the terms of his parole. He wasn't attending classes for sex offenders anymore. He'd ignored the other terms of his parole. He'd even had a few brushes with the law, but he hadn't been arrested. But without following the terms of his parole, the police were on him like white on rice, and a warrant was issued for his arrest on October 19th, 2000.
Well, not a second too soon,
Not
right?
a second too soon. By December 2000, Jeremy was looking for ways to stay out of jail, so he leaves Oklahoma buying a bus ticket to Alabama, but not before using his beguiling ways on an older woman at a local bar. He tells her how he's been railroaded by the justice system, how he's been framed by a corrupt police department.
Oh, geez.
And this woman is totally sympathetic to Jeremy because her own son is in prison in Missouri.
Okay.
She's like, it's okay, baby. I know. I know.
I understand.
I know. And as the story goes, Jeremy charmed this woman into handing over her son's identity to him.
Good grief.
His name is John Paul Chapman. She gives his name and his social security number so he can start a new life.
Jeez.
Her son, John Paul Chapman, is sitting in jail in Missouri.
Wow.
And it's kind of like, hey, he's not using it, so here you go. Why don't you use it? I'm sorry you're getting a bad shake in life, honey.
I heard she was up for Mother of the Year.
Yeah, there are lots of Mothers of the Year in here.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not so sure it wasn't Jeremy himself who told people that he could charm the pants off of a nun. And many don't believe that this is how he acquired his new identity because this story comes from Jeremy himself. So take that with a pinch of salt, okay?
Okay.
There are people who think it was actually Janine, Jeremy's mother, who procured this new identity for him. Regardless, Jeremy is now John Paul Chapman and is on his way to Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
And how close is it to Greenbow, Alabama?
It's close.
That's what movie?
Thank you, Forrest. Run, Forrest, run.
Sorry, go ahead.
I couldn't say Tuscaloosa, Alabama without saying Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But regardless of his name, there's a bounty hunter who's hot on his trail who didn't give a good goat's ass what he was calling himself. But the bounty hunter loses him. He loses Jeremy when he makes his way to Mobile, Alabama via Tuscaloosa.
Okay.
Mobile via Tuscaloosa.
Okay.
Now, when Jeremy makes it to Mobile, Alabama, it's December 2000. He approaches a construction site one day that's owned by a man named Mark Bentley, and he tells him he wants to work for him, and to prove how good he is, he would work for a full day for free.
Okay.
And Mark Bentley was very impressed with the work he did, and he hired him, and then, big mistake, let him stay at his trailer.
Oh, gee.
Jeremy Jones looked up to Bentley. He was a rough-hewn man with a strong personality. He was a church elder. Bentley was unequivocal about Jones doing drugs. Quote, I'll send your ass in a box back to your mama, end quote. So it's like, no drugs.
Right.
You get a job. You do drugs, no job. Jones dated several women in Mobile. He didn't set his limits when approaching the opposite sex, often seeking pretty and accomplished women, including a registered nurse and one girl who was getting her doctorate. Bentley's wife, Kim, Mark Bentley's wife, Kim, said that Jeremy was respectful and complimented her cooking. And according to Kim, when he saw someone sad, he wanted to cheer them up. His emotions bubbled near the surface, according to Kim, and he often giggled and, quote, he'd cry just as easy as a woman, end quote. What?
So was he kind of schizophrenic or, I mean...
Well, he's knucking futs for sure.
Well, yeah.
I think he's a drug addict.
Right. So,
And I think he's depressed.
Right.
And I think, I think he's covering up a lot of stuff with drugs.
Right.
Now, Kim thought that Jeremy yearned for a sense of family. He talked endlessly about his little brother, and he was, quote, excited about his mother coming to visit him, end quote. Janine Beard was happy that her son had found the Bentleys, and she even later says that Kim and Mark Bentley loved her son so much that they wanted him to marry their cousin.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if that's true or not, but okay. Kim Bentley's teenage stepdaughter called Jeremy, quote, kin, as in Barbie's boyfriend. And Kim Bentley said we were a family. He wanted to fit in with all of us. He fit in with everybody he met.
Gotcha.
So I think when he's with the Bentleys, he's trying.
Right.
He is a killer. He's trying.
He's kind of a chameleon.
He's all over the place. That's the best way to describe him. He really is a chameleon and all over the place. But then Jeremy started using drugs again, and he eventually fell out with his adopted family, and Mark said he was often strung out on meth, and they kicked him out. So he moved to a motel where he met Craig Baxter, a Douglasville man who was working temporarily in Mobile. And Jeremy approached Baxter at the motel saying that he liked his T-shirt. Like your shirt, man. And Craig Baxter was visiting Mobile from Georgia, working this temporary job, and Jeremy told him this very carefully contrived sob story as to why he was so down on his luck. I'm sure none of it had anything to do with smoking meth.
No, of course not.
But Mr. Baxter, Craig Baxter, felt bad for him and told him if you're ever in Georgia, I'm just here for a little while, but if you're ever in Georgia, give me a call. Big mistake.
Yep.
Big. Huge.
Huge. Big mistake.
Because Jeremy takes him up on this offer 2 months later, and in May of 2002, he'd been beaten up. He needed cash. He calls Craig Baxter, and Baxter wires him $50. And then the next day, without warning, Jeremy Jones has stitches over his eye, a black eye. He's been beaten up. He's dirty. He shows up on Craig Baxter's doorstep in Georgia.
Wow.
And Mr. Baxter said, okay, I'll let you stay in my basement.
Oh, wow.
Big mistake.
Yeah.
Big, huge.
Another big mistake.
Now, again, Jeremy presents himself as this hardworking guy. He was nice. He was eager to please. But as soon as Craig Baxter let him into his life, he helped Jeremy get a job and reestablish himself. And then Jeremy once again fell back into his old ways of drugs and deception. And Craig's wife, Jan, was the one who said, Jeremy's got to go.
Yeah.
He hasn't paid any rent for sleeping in the basement. It's time for him to hit the road.
Right.
He's like the guy who hangs around the house too long and makes the place smell weird.
Yeah, exactly.
That's him.
Yep.
And Jeremy gave Jan bad vibes. Quote, he kept weird hours. He'd be gone a lot at night. And once while watching the Osbournes on TV, Jeremy went on and on about Ozzy Osbourne's daughter saying, quote, ooh, what I could do with that, end quote. And it freaked Jan out. And Jan's like, yeah, he's got to hit the road.
Yeah, got to go.
So finally the Baxters kick him out. And Jeremy showed up at a neighbor's house crying, quote, he was very weak, recalled John McIntosh, the neighbor. Things really upset him, end quote.
So he's a good actor, too.
He's a good actor.
Okay, yeah.
I think he's a good actor. I don't know how charming he is.
Yeah.
Because some of the stuff that he says, I'm going to give you some quotes of his later. I would be like, get out of my face.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't have fallen for it. I just have a hard time thinking that other people would fall for some of this.
Right.
Now, he shows up at the neighbor's house, John McIntosh, and John and his wife, Carrie, are splitting up. So he lets Jeremy stay with him. Or them, because she's still there, and so is their son. I mean, they're going through a divorce, and everybody's in the same house.
Right.
And he gets him a job at Young Refinery in Douglasville, where John McIntosh is a manager. And John Paul Chapman passed a background check and was trained as a welder.
Okay.
Now, once again, Jeremy Jones endears himself to the work crew that he's around. He's a really friendly guy. He's an industrious, enabled person. He made lots of friends. It seemed like for a time he was going to get along with everybody. But the new, soon-to-be ex-wife, Carrie, told her husband, John, that Jeremy didn't seem right. And here's the thing. All the women think he's hinky.
Right.
All the women are saying something's wrong here.
Right.
And all the guys are like, he's fine.
He's a good guy. He's just down on his luck.
He's just a good old boy. He's down on his luck. At the same time, Carrie is saying this guy is hinky. There's a parole officer sniffing around Jeremy's mom's place and asking questions. Have you seen him? Have you heard from him? What's going on with Jeremy?
Right.
And his mom says, Janine says, I don't know. I haven't seen him. I have no idea where he is.
Yeah, especially if she helped get him a new identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the same time, Jeremy's hitting it off with Carrie and John McIntosh's son, Matt, who's 12 years old at the time. They played video games. They talked hunting. They horsed around in the backyard pool. This is a killer living in their home doing this with their son.
Wow.
On October 31st, 2002, Jeremy Jones makes up 12-year-old Matt's face like Ace Frehley of the rock band Kiss. And then Matt's little friend, he makes him up as Gene Simmons. Then Jeremy Jones, a.k.a. John Paul Chapman, headed to Gibson's, a popular Douglasville tavern for Halloween night.
Okay.
You go out on Halloween. This is so crazy because what happens next? He has spent his early evening making up 12-year-old boys' faces to look like Kiss.
Right.
And now he has gone to Gibson's for Halloween night.
Okay.
The bar was filled with customers all dressed up for Halloween. One of the guests that evening was 38-year-old Tina Mayberry. Tina was in full costume, and she was dressed as one of my favorites, Betty Boop.
Oh.
Boop, boop, be-doop. I love Betty Boop. But just before midnight, Tina is found in a bloody heap right outside the entrance of the bar. She'd been stabbed somewhere a short distance away and had actually put up a really good fight. And maybe her assailant wanted to kidnap her and she fought him off, but she'd been fatally stabbed in the process. She stabbed in her little costume in the parking lot and then finds her way back somehow to the entrance of the bar, bleeding and looking for help, and she collapses at the door.
Oh, wow.
She's rushed to the hospital in Atlanta where she died shortly thereafter. Tina was actually Eunice Martina Mayberry.
Okay.
She was born on June 22nd, 1964 in Atlanta to parents William and Judy. At the time she was murdered, she was living in Lithia Springs, Georgia.
Okay.
This murder is unsolved. Then, one night after Tina's murder, while Jeremy is still living with John McIntosh, he brings a woman home to his room. She goes screaming from his bedroom, and John believes Jeremy when he says, "This is just we're drunk, it's just a misunderstanding." But the next morning, the police show up because the woman has gone to the police and said, "He tried to rape me."
Oh, wow.
So as not to rock the boat, so to speak, Jeremy goes down to the police station with John McIntosh in tow as his character witness, and Jeremy says they were both drunk, and John vouched for Jeremy's character. It was just a drunken misunderstanding. The whole thing is dropped because she wasn't actually raped. But yeah. So many red flags.
Yep.
It's enough to get Jeremy kicked out of the house, though.
I'm sure.
And one night at Gibson's, Jeremy meets Vicki Freeman. Vicki was hanging out with one of her friends, and Vicki is later going to say she met the guy who she called John Paul Chapman. This guy simply walked right up to her and her friend, had this great smile, was nonchalantly mentioning how he couldn't help but notice how beautiful she was. And then after a short chit-chat, Jeremy walked off again.
Okay.
So this is his thing.
Right.
He's going to walk up and say, "I couldn't notice how beautiful you were."
Right.
But then he's going to walk away.
So he's not really invasive.
Yeah. Very mysterious.
Yeah.
It's the hunt. It's the chase,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So he would pique people's interest and then pull back, trying to create even more interest. He wandered in and out of Vicki and her friend's view. He was in their line of sight and out of their line of sight. And Vicki wanted to know more about him. And by the time he returned to her table later that night, she's all ears. She's like, "Okay, I'm ready to talk to this guy."
Okay.
She was very spellbound by Jeremy, and she drank in every word and every gentle and smooth mannerism he displayed as easily as she drank the beer in her hand. That's what I read.
Sounds like those 1950s newspaper descriptions.
I mean, exactly. It's basically saying he's charming the pants off of her, and he actually literally and figuratively is charming the pants off of her. These two start dating, and by the fall of 2003, they had moved in together. Vicki and Jeremy, or John Paul Chapman, as she knew him to be, lived in Vicki's apartment, which is in a community called Villa Rica, Georgia. There wasn't any controversy while he stayed there, but just a month after moving in, Jeremy is booked on charges of public indecency for allegedly exposing himself. Now, the incident involved Vicki's neighbors, and here's how this went down. Vicki lived next door to an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Godfrey, and their teenage daughter, whose name was Brittany.
Okay.
Jeremy had noticed the 18-year-old Brittany right away when he moved in, and he was smitten. And in an attempt to get to know her better, Jeremy became friendly with her parents.
Yeah.
He introduced himself to the Godfreys and began chit-chatting with them whenever he bumped into them. And he would often see them out simply walking their dog. And when they were, he'd just make an excuse to stop and chit-chat.
Gotcha.
He wants to be seen as the really nice guy. But then Jeremy began to approach 18-year-old Brittany, who was like, "This guy is weird."
Yeah.
And sometimes he would be high on drugs. And then he would wait until her parents were gone, and then he would kind of pester her. And it was during one of these moments where he's high and he's ranting and rambling and trying to talk to her that Jeremy actually exposed himself to Brittany.
Oh, jeez.
He showed her the goods. He pulled out the bait and tackle, the twig and berries.
The twig and berries.
And she was not impressed. And her parents were horrified, and Jeremy is arrested.
Yep.
Book him. But he's booked as John Paul Chapman. So the outstanding warrant for Jeremy Jones doesn't mean squat. And here's the kicker. This is what's going to infuriate everybody.
Okay.
They fingerprint him, and when his prints are put through the FBI's integrated automated fingerprint identification system, or IAFIS, the system did not connect his prints with his earlier prints.
What?
From being Jeremy Jones.
So what good is that system?
He is Jeremy Jones, an Oklahoma construction worker who's wanted on charges of rape, sodomy, and jumping bond. They print him for exposing himself, and it does not match.
Wow.
The system misses it.
Wow.
But the system is going to miss it 2 more times.
Jeez.
So just hang on. This is where everyone's going to be enraged. So he pays his bail, he's sprung from jail, and while Jeremy is waiting to be sprung, Brittany's parents find below her bedroom window a box that contained rope, tape, and binoculars.
Oh my gosh.
So there's like a serial killer kit below their 18-year-old daughter's window. But this isn't over, because the police are going to show up again one day because Jeremy was, quote, wigging out, end quote. Jeremy tells police that he'd been on a 2-week meth bender. He'd shot up 2 grams of meth and was trying to kill himself. Now, by this time, though, he doesn't know it, but Jeremy has advanced liver damage and Hep C from sharing needles.
Wow.
Jeremy is only 31 years old.
He's rode hard and put away wet.
Yeah.
Yep.
Drugs will do that to you.
Yep.
In January of 2004, he's picked up again for criminal trespassing, and they'd still miss his fingerprints again this time, matching in the database. Then Jeremy is released from the Carroll County Jail in January of 2004, where he's been for the criminal trespassing charges. 1 month later, it's February 14th, Valentine's Day. Catherine Collins is a known sex worker in New Orleans. She is found on February 14th, Valentine's Day, savagely sexually assaulted and brutally beaten to death in the French Quarter's red light district.
Wow.
This murder will go unsolved.
Yeah.
A month later, Jeremy and Vicky decide to move from Villa Rica in Georgia to the Arbor Village mobile home park just outside of Douglasville, Georgia. It's here that Jeremy meets 16-year-old Amanda Greenwell. Amanda and her 18-year-old stepbrother, James Strickland, would see Jeremy around the trailer park. They didn't know him very well. Other residents said he was always pretty high and had a pretty hard drug problem. So it seems to me, everything I read about Jeremy, everywhere he goes, it seems like, yeah, he's a nice guy, but he has a bad drug problem.
Right.
He's got a bad drug habit.
Right.
Jeremy was always wondering if the cops were looking for him. One neighbor, Eric Hensley, said that he and Jeremy were, quote, friends until Eric asked him to pray with him. And then he completely flipped out. So no Jesus for Jeremy, apparently. And based on all of his actions, I kind of understand.
Right.
Another neighbor, Tammy Norris, would see Jeremy fight with Vicky, and then he'd be sobbing at the mobile home park's payphone after the two would argue. I'm going to guess he called his mom.
Yeah.
You'll probably think he's called his mom, too, in just a little bit.
Okay.
On March 12, 2004, 16-year-old Amanda Greenwell went to the mobile home park's payphone to make a call. She was never seen again. She wasn't gone long before her father, Rick Greenwell, called police because he's worried about her. And police are saying to her dad, well, maybe she just ran off. And Rick Greenwell was like, no, I'm not having this.
Yeah.
Amanda's a good girl. She's never been in trouble. She would not run away. Something is wrong. So now police think that maybe she's been abducted. And police have no clues, but they start questioning all the residents of the trailer hood, and that includes Jeremy Jones. But Jeremy is used to playing it cool with the cops, and he tells them everything he thinks they want to hear, and the police think nothing to see here with John Paul Chapman.
Right.
Let's just move along. And this is a guy who has a rap sheet showing that he'd exposed himself to a teenage girl just a year earlier.
Jeez.
So why aren't the police doing anything?
Yeah, I mean, did they run any kind of
Nobody's
check?
putting two and two together.
Right.
So even in the wake of all of that, police have no clues. 1 month later, on April 15th, 2004, 38-year-old Patrice Enders goes missing. Patrice owns Tambers Trim and Tan. She's a hairstylist.
Okay.
Patrice is married, has a 15-year-old son from a previous marriage. Jeremy goes into the beauty shop and asks Patrice, who was in the salon alone, if she could come out and help him. He tells her that his car might need a jump. Then he forces her in the car with a knife and tells her that he's going to kill her. She cries, begging for her life, saying, please don't kill me. Her salon is right off of Route 369, and she had loads of regular customers in Forsyth County, and Patrice's car is still on the premises. The salon is unlocked, her lunch is sitting on the counter, and Patrice's purse is in her car. Cash from the salon is missing, cash from her wallet is missing, but all of her credit cards remain. She's just vanished.
Gone.
5 days after Patrice goes missing, Amanda Greenwell's body is discovered in the forested area of the Wildlands not far from Arbor Village. Her body was badly decomposed, but the coroner could tell she'd been killed with a knife and had been choked. Her neck had actually been broken. No one, not one cop or authority, thought to look further into Jeremy Jones, a.k.a. John Paul Chapman, at the trailer hood. Meanwhile, a woman comes forward to say that at the hair salon where Patrice has been abducted, she was driving past around the time Patrice went missing, between 11:45-ish and noon, and what she saw was a male with brown hair, brown eyes, and a mustache, 30-something. He was wearing a sweatshirt-type coat and a camouflage baseball hat. He had unruly tufts of hair sticking out from under the cap.
Okay.
I read that and I thought, don't most men have unruly tufts of hair when they're wearing a baseball hat? It's like, I haven't made it to get my hair cut yet, so I'm just going to shove it under here.
That's kind of why you wear a baseball cap.
There were lots of theories on what happened to Patrice. She'd run off with another man. She'd run off to be a stripper. She was murdered by her husband, Rob. Her husband's name was Rob, by the way. Lots of people were looking for her and offering rewards for her safe return or information about her whereabouts. But meanwhile, Jeremy is losing his shit. He's starting to fall apart, and he goes to his old buddy, John McIntosh, and he tells John that his life is a wreck and how he'd screwed it all up, and he doesn't admit to murder. John thinks that what Jeremy is talking about in this crying rant is his drug problem.
Right.
But the more Jeremy talked, the more John starts to think, something is wrong here.
This just ain't right.
Something is terribly, terribly wrong.
Right.
And not long after this confession of his sins, on June 15th, 2004, Jeremy, a.k.a. John Paul Chapman, is arrested for possession of meth, marijuana, obstruction, and possession of drug paraphernalia. He's in jail for a full week, and I read that that was longer than any jail time he had ever served for his previous rape or assault charges.
Just amazing.
Again, he's fingerprinted. Again, the FBI matching software fails to match him as Jeremy Jones, a man wanted in Oklahoma. When he's out, after his week, he makes his way to his old boss's door in Alabama, Mark Bentley. He begs him for a job and a place to stay. Mark forgives him and allows him to stay in his home. And in fact, Mark and his wife are getting ready to leave, and Jeremy would be at their home with Mark's cousin, Scooter Coleman, who was there to be a house sitter.
Okay.
And here's why they are leaving. It's Wednesday, September 15th, 2004, and Hurricane Ivan is on its way to Mobile, Alabama. And according to the couple, they allowed Jones to stay in their mobile home with their cousin Scooter while they fled the approaching hurricane to be with their children and relatives in Chickasaw, Alabama.
Okay.
Early the next morning, Thursday, while Hurricane Ivan was bearing down on Mobile, Alabama, Jones contacted Kim Bentley through the use of two-way phones in an effort to locate a radio and some batteries. So he's using the walkie-talkies to talk to the wife.
Okay.
And Kim Bentley informed Jeremy that those items, the batteries, the radio, they could probably be found in her bedroom closet. However, she doesn't want Jeremy in her closet. She says, you tell Scooter.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell Scooter, because we trust Scooter. He's part of our family. Tell Scooter to go look for him in the closet.
Right.
But instead, Jeremy personally scoured through Kim's closet and found Kim's .25 caliber handgun hidden under clothing and other items on the shelf.
Not good.
Later that Thursday afternoon, the Bentley family returned to their home in Turnerville. Throughout the day, Mark Bentley, Scooter Coleman, and Jeremy worked on damage caused by the storm in Bentley's yard. And it was during this time that the Bentley's neighbor, 43-year-old Lisa Marie Nichols, returned home after riding out the storm someplace else.
Okay.
And Jeremy asks, who is this woman? Who is this girl? And Mark Bentley, who informed Jeremy that the worst thing he could have said, she's a single female living alone in the mobile home next door.
Wow.
Throughout the morning of September 17th, 2004, until approximately 4:30 a.m., Jeremy and another neighbor, Chris Hill, consumed or ingested illegal narcotics. Then around 5 a.m. the same morning, Lisa Nichols went to work at her job at a local grocery store. And during that time, Lisa was at work. Mark Bentley, Scooter Coleman, and Jeremy Jones continued the cleanup on Bentley's yard. And at some point that Friday, Jeremy Jones requested that Kim Bentley purchase for him a 6-pack of Bud Light beer.
Okay.
So Kim Bentley leaves the house and returned with Jones's 6-pack of Bud Light and then left the house with her kids. So he's there alone with his 6-pack of Bud Light and his drugs.
Right.
She takes the kids and goes.
Okay.
That same day, Joel Taft Edge picked up Scooter Coleman from the Bentleys, and they traveled to Edge's home to clean up his storm damage. And Coleman stayed with Edge throughout the entire day, leaving to return to the Bentleys' home well after dark. And when Lisa Nichols returned home from work at around 5 o'clock, Mark Bentley and Jeremy were at the Bentley house. At approximately 6 p.m., Mark Bentley offered to buy hamburgers for Jones and himself. The closest restaurant open for business was a Hardee's, which was approximately a 30-minute drive from the Bentley home. Furthermore, because the Hardee's was the only restaurant open for business, Mark Bentley stated that he waited in line for hamburgers for a whole hour.
Oh, wow.
Because everything's shut down because of this hurricane, right? So
I don't know if that was the only restaurant, I don't know if I'd
go there.
Wait an hour for a Hardee's burger.
For a hamburger?
Nothing to get Hardee's burgers.
There was no electricity. They had nothing.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's waiting in line for hamburgers, and he's left Jeremy alone in the trailer.
Okay.
Because once Jeremy is left alone, he took Kim Bentley's .25 caliber handgun and his Bud Light and went next door to the home of Lisa Nichols. He entered Lisa's house, raped her under the threat of violence, and shot her 3 times in the head, killing her instantly.
Wow.
Jeremy then gets in touch with his estranged girlfriend, Vicky. He tells her that he's going back to work for Mark. And Vicky is so happy about this, and she tells him to look for a nice place for the two of them to live, and she'll join him soon.
Jeez.
Jeremy is making this phone call from inside Lisa Nichols' home after he has murdered her.
Wow. Gee whiz.
So, chameleon, able to switch like that.
And what a dummy. I mean...
Oh, he does everything so close to home. But why wouldn't he? He's been in several times. They've taken his fingerprints. They're like, you're free to go.
Yep.
Jeremy, in an effort to cover up his crime, returned to the Bentley's residence where he obtained an undetermined amount of gasoline. Jeremy goes back to Lisa's home, covers her body and the bathroom in which she's lying dead with gasoline. Then he lights her on fire. And it caused a momentary explosion. And this is heard by a neighbor. Her name is Ann Pardon. And Miss Pardon is later going to testify that she heard what happened to be an explosion between 7 and 8 p.m. Then Jeremy very calmly walks back to the Bentley's house.
Jeez.
Sometime after 8 p.m., Joel Edge and Scooter Coleman, they finish work on Mr. Edge's property, and Edge brings Scooter back to the Bentley residence. And shortly after, Mr. Bentley returned with all the hamburgers. Just as Jeremy is exiting the shower. He's killed somebody. He needed to shower. And after the three men went to bed at around 10 p.m., Mark Bentley, through his open bedroom window, heard a noise and smelled the odor of gasoline. Mark, after investigating, sees Jeremy just outside his bedroom window where he kept several gasoline cans. And when he confronted Jeremy said he was putting gasoline in Mark's four-wheelers so that he could take a late-night ride. That's why he's messing with the gasoline.
All right.
And Mark instructed Jeremy, get your ass back in the house and go to bed.
Right.
On Saturday morning, September 18th, 2004, Lisa Nichols did not show up to work, nor did she return any phone calls from her family. And late that Saturday evening, Lisa's two daughters, Jennifer and Amber, and her son-in-law, Todd, drove to check on Lisa at her home in Turnerville. And after arriving at her home shortly before midnight, they were surprised after walking through the house with a flashlight because there's still no electricity. They make it all the way to the bathroom and they find the charred remains of Lisa lying on the bathroom floor.
Wow. I'm surprised that the whole thing didn't go up into flames.
Well, I think he just uses enough to burn the body, not enough for the whole house to burn down. Although he burnt down a couple of houses. This one he did not.
Was this a trailer or a house?
This is a trailer.
Yeah, because, man, those things are combustible.
Yeah. Now, Lisa's daughters and son-in-law ran from her home hysterical and screaming, and they went straight to Mark Bentley's house, where Mark and Scooter immediately ran back to Lisa's house in a panicked attempt to help her. They're thinking, we can perform CPR, we can do something. And here's the thing. Jeremy doesn't go with them. Jeremy stays behind. There's little or no emotion. He's not interested in helping. And the group quickly discovered that no amount of help was going to help Lisa. They call 911, and deputies from the Mobile County Sheriff's Department arrives shortly thereafter. Now, when Jeremy learns from Mark Bentley early that Saturday morning that Lisa's body had been discovered severely burned, but not completely destroyed, Jeremy tells off the cuff to Mark that he had been informed by his uncle, who was a Vietnam vet, that to completely dispose of a dead body during the war, soldiers simply doused the body in gasoline and lit it on fire.
Oh, wow.
Hours later that Sunday, after having acted strangely around the Bentleys throughout the morning, Jeremy departs the house and he never returns.
Why would you even say that when you've been responsible for it?
Yeah.
Dumb.
Now, the preliminary autopsy of Lisa Nichols allowed the detectives to quickly learn that the cause of her death was 3 gunshot wounds to the head. And after the sheriff's detectives learned of Jeremy Jones's presence at the Bentley's home and his suspicious actions surrounding the time of the murder, they start looking for him. They want to question John Paul Chapman.
We got a couple questions for you, dude.
In the meantime, the police are questioning anyone and everyone, including a witness who saw, quote, unusual activity outside the home, a car they didn't recognize, and they were able to recall a little bit of the plates of the car. So the police talk to Mark Bentley, and he tells them, oh, that car belongs to my sometimes employee named John Paul Chapman.
Oops.
And Mark doesn't just give them his name. He says, here's his name. Here's his social security number. Because he's an employee, right? So he's got that information and he hands it over to the police.
I see the house of cards starting to
fall.
tremble.
And this leads police to go on a massive hunt for Jeremy Jones, a.k.a. John Paul Chapman. And he's aware of it. He knows they're looking for him. So he contacts the police himself. He thinks he's going to smooth talk them. It's worked every time before, right? Why wouldn't it work this time?
Right.
So he calls them and he's really vague with the police, but they keep him on the line long enough to trace the call.
There you go.
And when they get his location, they go full bore and they swoop in and they arrest Jeremy Jones and take him into custody. And I read they took him into custody, quote, with force.
There you go.
When they get him in the car, Jeremy Jones says, quote, I had every intention of making you kill me, end quote.
Wow.
Now, police are going to keep him in jail and a close eye on him while they sort through the murder of Lisa Nichols. And at this point, they still think his name is John Paul Chapman, for goodness sake.
Right.
But then his alias begins to fall to pieces. They drag his name through the national database, and Mobile authorities get a phone call from Missouri where they say, look it, you can't have John Paul Chapman because have John Paul Chapman locked up in a Missouri State Penitentiary for the past several years, by the way. So they send off their John Paul Chapman's photo and prints to Missouri, and they compare them to that set of prints and photo of John Paul Chapman sitting in jail, and they go, huh, you're right. It's two different people.
Duh.
But they don't tell Jeremy that they know this. They just leave him alone and they watch him. And then Jeremy calls his mama from the prison payphone. And the call is traced to Janine Beard of Oklahoma. And at that point, you'd think they'd figure it out. And they do, because the son of Janine Beard of Oklahoma is Jeremy Bryan Jones. Finally, they put it together. But he gives it to him by calling his mom.
Wow.
So they walk in and they serve him a warrant for his arrest for violating his parole. Also shocked, Vicki Freeman, the girlfriend, who now knows that the love of her life has a track record of violent crime and he's a sex offender, and that's not his real name.
Wow. Can you imagine all of a sudden you find out somebody that you're passionate about is just a nightmare?
Well, surprisingly, at least for me, Vicki stands by her man, by her new man, or her old man with a new name.
Give me a break.
But from jail, he's calling her and telling her that he has been wrongly accused. He's being framed.
Yeah.
But with police in the interrogation room, he's telling a different story. He tells the police, quote, I might be one of the most prolific serial killers in recent history, end quote.
Wow.
And he starts to talk.
Wow.
But police are taking everything he says with a grain of salt, right? He's lied about everything. So why wouldn't he lie about all of this too? Everything he's about to say too.
Okay.
They start verifying the things that he's telling him. First up, Tina Mayberry. She was the woman in the Betty Boop costume who made her way back to the bar on Halloween night before dying in the Atlanta hospital. Mm-hmm. It's confirmed that Jeremy was indeed at the party that night, and he gives details on her murder that only the killer would know. Then he moves on to Amanda Greenwell, the 16-year-old girl who disappeared from the trailer park where he was living. He gives more details that only the killer could give.
Right.
Then they discover that Jeremy has rented himself a storage facility in Douglas County. Why do killers always got that storage facility, man?
Silence of the Lambs.
In the storage unit was a box with lots of photos of 8 different women. Now, none of these women were his victims, but they were all petite with long brunette hair. It's his type, every single one of these girls, long brunette hair. So police want to make sure these women are still alive. So they put out these photos and discover that they're just acquaintances of Jeremy's. But the search in the storage unit isn't over, and they do find a little ring that belonged to Amanda Greenwell.
Boom.
When they questioned Vicki Freeman about the day that Amanda went missing, because remember, she was living with him at the time, she tells police that Jeremy came home that day with scratches and was covered in mud. And I guess while she is recanting these details, she's recalling all of this in the police department, and she has this epiphany. She realizes the man who hadn't given her his real name had actually killed this young girl. Like, they see it on her face.
Oh, wow.
And she blurts out, quote, "Oh no, he did it.
Wow.
He did it," end quote. Now, she's going to go back and forth a few more times because she loves Jeremy.
Sure.
But she's going to stand by her man. But in the police interrogation room, while they're giving her all this information, and she just starts talking about what he looked like that day, on the day that Amanda went missing, they're like, we could see it on her face.
Sure.
She realizes that he did it. Then the mother lode happens because Jeremy starts flapping his gums. He's already told them about Lisa Nichols and Amanda Greenwell, but police look at this pattern and they look at the unsolved cases in the vicinity where Jeremy Jones has been living for the past 10 years. So they start asking him and he starts confessing. Remember, he abducts, rapes, murders, and burns or just disposes of the body in wooded areas.
Right.
So what about the murder of Catherine Collins, the sex worker in New Orleans? Well, police had their doubts he'd gone as far south as New Orleans, but when they asked him about it, he provided details that only the killer could know. Wow. And police immediately are convinced he is the killer of Catherine Collins. There's also other evidence that did put him in New Orleans at the time of Catherine's death. And one piece of evidence was a traffic ticket that Jeremy received in the state of Louisiana right around the time that Catherine was killed. And they also found an eyewitness from New Orleans who was more than ready to testify that he witnessed a man fitting Jeremy's exact description at the time of the crime.
Gotcha.
But Jeremy gives an even more vivid, detailed description of what happened to Catherine, and this leaves detectives with zero doubts that he was indeed her killer. And the specific thing that he said was that he had stuck a knife in Catherine's eye before slamming the hilt of the blade into her mouth, knocking several teeth out. He also mentioned that he conducted a post-mortem mutilation of her vagina.
Wow.
And these were all things that were true and something that someone would never know unless they were the killer.
Sure.
Then police also noticed that when he's just chit-chatting, he's just one of the guys with the police officers. But when he talks about the murders, he turns into a very different person. He gets a wild look in his eyes. So that chameleon thing you were talking about.
Yeah.
He also tells police that he went to New Orleans to celebrate Mardi Gras and was all hyped up on meth the entire time. When he met Catherine Collins in the French Quarter, he was going back to an abandoned drug house with her. He paid her for her services. She was ready to fulfill them. And according to Jeremy, she had already disrobed. But at this point, he was having second thoughts. Jeremy said that Catherine was angry when he hesitated and they argued. And then Catherine ran away from him. She was naked, but he went after her. He tackled her to the ground and then stabbed her with a knife. And when the police officer asked Jeremy why, very calmly and with no remorse, Jeremy replied, quote, "The bitch deserved it," end quote.
Wow.
But police think that it was Catherine who had second thoughts and had run away from him, and then he chased her and killed her. But he still had all the intimate details of the murder.
Sure.
Regardless of all of that,
Right.
who chased whom, what happened,
Right.
he still had all the intimate details of the actual murder.
Right.
Then Jeremy moves on and he gives another major confession. He says that he was the person who murdered Patrice Tamber Endress. He admitted to killing her, and he actually gave the police a location where he had dumped her body. But he tells them he dumped her body off of a bridge, and he didn't. But he also said that he was so high on meth at the time that when any of it happened, he just couldn't be certain of the details. So he's saying, yeah, I killed her. I killed Patrice in the salon.
Right.
The salon owner. I killed her, and I dumped her body off a bridge. But they never found a body off the bridge.
Okay.
He said he'd been drifting around in his beat-up car and stopped at the salon and asked Patrice for directions. And according to him, it was then he realized that she was alone and this was his moment to strike. And he claimed that he quickly rushed Patrice out of the salon where he proceeded to rape and kill her. He drove off with her dead body, stuffed in his car, and then he claimed to have tossed her corpse off a nearby bridge over Sweetwater Creek. I'm telling you now, he didn't throw her body. He may have killed her.
Right.
He didn't throw her body over a bridge.
But if he was high on meth, I mean...
He doesn't remember.
Sure.
But at the same time, he's telling police one story. He's giving interviews to Atlanta reporters and telling them that he had nothing to do with any of these murders. So he's confessing all of this to the police. He's telling his mom and he's telling Vicky that he's innocent.
Right.
And then he gives interviews with Atlanta reporters and tells them he's being framed and he's also innocent. Then Jeremy confessed that he had killed Danny and Kathy Freeman on December 30th, 1999, because they, quote, owed his friend money. Danny Freeman and his wife Kathy were found shot to death in their home in Welsh, Oklahoma. These were the two who were also missing their daughter Ashley and her best friend Laura Bible. And these two girls have never been found. Jeremy claimed that they owed his buddy thousands of dollars. He insisted that his friends hadn't even put him up to killing, but he simply did it because he thought that, quote, people should pay their debts, end quote. Again, he knows things about these murders that no one, unless the murderer, would know, or someone who was there at the same time.
Right.
And when police ask what happened to Ashley and Laura, he says he drove the girls to a remote area where he raped one of them, not saying which one, before killing them both. Jeremy said that the place he dumped their body was a mine pit located nearby. Once again, he was very high on meth when it happened, so he couldn't be certain exactly where he dumped them. And plenty of mine shafts have been checked to date, but they've never found Laura or Ashley.
Right.
But then it gets weirder, because on the day that Danny and Kathy Freeman are murdered and their mobile home torched, An Oklahoma police officer says that he himself was accosted by Jeremy Jones. Quote, Jeremy Jones had run up to the officer in a drug-induced belligerent haze, claiming that he was, quote, being chased by someone who was trying to kill him, end quote. So all of this makes his timeline pretty daggone tight. So did he actually murder this family and then take the daughter and her best friend? Or did he know the person who did it and after hearing about it or participating in some way, hallucinate that it was his own doing?
Right.
I think he was so drugged up, he didn't know which end was up.
Sure.
And this murder is almost identical to the murder of 1996, the torching of the home of Danny Oakley and Doris Harris. And these crimes are 3 years apart. Now, there's no solid evidence that he committed these crimes. It's just his confession. And enter Jeremy's new public defense attorney. This poor guy.
Jeez.
He's trying to keep his client's mouth shut. His name is Habib Yazdi. And he's out telling the media that Jeremy is mentally ill. And he wasn't in the right frame of mind to speak with law enforcement without an attorney present. Well, I agree with that.
Yeah, about the mental part.
Well, but he gave up his right. I'm sure they Mirandized him and they said, do you want to talk? I mean, he's in the back of the car or he's in the interrogation room saying, I'm one of the most prolific serial killers you've ever met.
Right.
Regardless, October 27, 2005, Jeremy Jones is taken to Mobile County District Court to stand before Judge George Hardesty for his pretrial hearing, and the charges against him in the murder of Lisa Nichols were presented to the grand jury, and police gave their account of finding Lisa Nichols' body. The judge also heard from Lisa Nichols' two daughters who actually found their mom in the ruins of the house that had been set on fire. And at this point, Jeremy is not denying that he was in the home. What he's saying was that he was there as a guest of Lisa Nichols and that the two of them had done drugs and had consensual sex. And Jeremy tells the grand jury that it was a drug overdose that actually killed Lisa. And he said that after she was dead from the drug overdose, he tried to make it look like something else. He said that he was fearful of being implicated in her OD, so he proceeded to make her death look like a murder instead.
He did a pretty good job.
And he said that this was for a reason, that he shot her after she died and then proceeded to set her on fire.
Wow.
And I read where his attorney said there's no crime in shooting a dead body. And I just wanted to be like, oh my gosh, really? Really? So what happened to all those other confessions? Well, Jeremy's defense attorney tries to do damage control. He makes it a point to say to the press that he believed Jeremy had been given a powerful antipsychotic drug while in prison and that some of his antics were a side effect of this. He's trying to make Jeremy's pretrial confessions inadmissible in court. It didn't work, and he was indicted by the grand jury for the sexual assault and murder of Lisa Nichols. He enters a plea of not guilty when he's arraigned on May 10th, 2005. And when the judge suggests that Jeremy get a psych evaluation before the trial, Jeremy shouts out, quote, I ain't crazy, end quote, in the courtroom.
Oh, boy.
I ain't crazy.
Wow. He's not doing himself any favors at all.
The lead prosecutor, Will Dill, can't make that up.
What was the other guy?
Chuck Chance.
Yeah. So you got Chuck Chance.
And Will Dill.
And Will Dill.
Yes.
Love these names.
The lead prosecutor, you would think he'd go by William.
Yeah.
The lead prosecutor, Will Dill, did a really good job of showing the monster that Jeremy Jones was when he brutally and sexually raped Lisa, shot her, then set her body on fire. And while all the other neighbors are worried and concerned, and Jeremy's just sitting home watching TV, totally unfazed or concerned about what had happened right next door. And he says, why is he acting this way? Because he knew it was his handiwork.
Yeah.
The jury hears a taped telephone conversation where Jeremy had called Mark Bentley. Mark is really surprised in this phone call because he doesn't realize that Jeremy Jones is going to call him. And he says, why did you do all this? How could you kill these people? And Jeremy doesn't admit to the guilt. He only says, quote, it was like a nightmare. I was in a movie. I was higher than I had ever been before in my whole life, end quote.
Yeah, whatever.
Which isn't an excuse.
Whatever.
And all of those taped confessions of the other murders, well, he did it, he said, so he could get special perks in prison, like unlimited phone time, free food, and stuff like that. He made 600 calls to his mother from jail.
Wow.
That's why I said I think he's a mama's boy.
You think?
It only took the jury a couple of hours to come back with a verdict of guilty. he would face life in prison or execution. And he starts talking again. Offhandedly, he mentions he may have murdered 4 or 5 sex workers in and around Atlanta. Wow. When he's taken in for his final sentencing, instead of apologizing to the families or begging the judge for leniency, he condemned those who prosecuted him and said he was an innocent man and that all of his confessions were lies. Then he turned to the judge, Charles Graddick, and said, quote, "You will reap God's anger for executing an innocent man. You shall surely be put to death." End quote. The judge apparently ignored Jeremy's rant. I mean, it's still his courtroom, right? You got to think a judge has seen just about everything. So he let him say all that stuff, and he was like, okay, well, Jeremy Jones, you're a threat to society, and you need to be eliminated by way of lethal injection. And as he's leaving the courtroom, he mouthed, "I love you," to his mother. So he makes this whole speech and tells the judge that, you know, you're going to burn in hell because you're executing an innocent man. And the judge is just like, okay, lethal injection.
Right.
Everybody have a nice day. Mr. Jones, you're headed to death row.
Yeah.
So now it's 2022 and Jeremy Jones sits on death row. The Alabama Court of Appeals upheld his death sentence in 2010. Did he kill Jennifer Judd way back in 1992? He says he did, out of jealousy. Then he recanted. Did he kill Danny Oakley and Doris Harris? He said he did. Then he said he didn't. On this murder in particular, there are a couple of other suspects who have been arrested. The 2 men who were suspected were meth dealers and users. So was it a story he knew from his dealer, or was he there? Did he give 19-year-old Justin Hutchings a lethal injection? Yeah, he says he did that too. Then he took it back. What about Tina Newberry, who died on Halloween night? Yeah, he says that was him. Nope, I was just saying I did that. Catherine Collins, the sex worker in New Orleans. Yes. No. Amanda Greenwell. He says he killed her, then took it back. What about Patrice Tambers Endres? Her body was found December 6th, 2005, 2 months after Jeremy was sentenced to death. She's found behind the Lebanon Baptist Church in the woods. It's just her skull. It was 600 days on the nose from the day that Patrice went missing. He confessed to this crime, but told them he'd thrown the body off a bridge. And then there's Lisa Nichols, the one he couldn't get away with. In the end, Jeremy Jones was charged for the rape and murder of Lisa, the murder of Amanda Greenwell, and the murder of Catherine Collins. He was convicted of the murder of Lisa Nichols. He took several polygraphs over all of these confessions, indicating that he was, in fact, telling the truth.
Yeah.
So did he murder all these people? Police would say that when they saw him sitting in front of them, he was a nice guy. He was the kind of guy who would help an old lady with her groceries to the car. And that's why people never thought that Jeremy fit the profile. But according to the confession Jeremy Jones did make, he murdered 21 women in 12 years in 5 different states. And let's not forget the FBI's fingerprinting fiasco.
That piece of work.
If it had been working correctly, lives would have been saved.
Sure.
Catherine Collins, Amanda Greenwell, Lisa Nichols, all murders that happened after he'd been arrested and fingerprinted and run through the system.
Wow.
And while these other families are left to wonder why and how and if, Jeremy sits on death row. Quote, "When I'm high on dope, I ain't got no integrity. I can become the evilest, most cruelest individual person. It's like Heckle and Jekyll," end quote. And I guess this self-proclaimed smooth talker didn't know the difference between Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, said he could charm the pants off a nun. Jeremy does talk of an appeal, and not only that, of winning his appeal. Quote, "One day I'll be a free man. I'll write me a book and laugh my ass off," end quote.
Good luck with that.
But for now, he sits on death row with no possibility for parole at Holman Correction Facility in Atmore, Alabama. No execution date has been set. But that's the story of Jeremy Jones, the charmer. And that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitched to Homicide listeners. This is Chris Calvert. I love doing research and writing about real crimes, but I also love writing about fictional people who commit horrible atrocities. When you're ready to take a break from true crime for fictional crime, go to chriscalvert.com, where you'll find all my books, including some free ones to get you started. Jane Doe is one badass chick who quietly hunts terrorists in the United States. The Sex and Lies books are all FBI and CIA cases with a little romance on the side. And coming summer 2022, Book 10 in the series, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll, releases. You can find all of these books everywhere, and if you like to listen instead of read, you can find them all on Audible. So go grab a free book or take a listen. I love all the characters I've written. I've given them pain, ruined their lives, make them suffer, and maybe even throw in a heroic death. Or maybe they live to fight another day. Check it all out at chriscalvert.com, and thanks for being a listener of Hitched to Homicide.
Wow. Jeremy.
Yeah.
A guy that...
Rot in jail, Jeremy.
I'm telling you, jeez. Okay, well, let's get away from that and do something a little more lighthearted, like a Bless Your Heart.
Well, bless your heart.
Dateline, Thetford, Vermont. A 55-year-old driver named Kevin Bacon hit a parked police car. Don't go there yet. Police car while searching his smartphone for a classic episode of Saved by the Bell. The sideswipe occurred outside Thetford, Vermont, when Bacon, and no, not the footloose Bacon, as everybody's probably thinking it is, hit the parked cruiser of an officer who was tending to a disabled vehicle on Interstate 91, according to documents posted by The Smoking Gun.
So it's parked. He hits a parked car.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he's trying to find...
Is there anything worse than hitting a parked police car?
Well, yeah, if you're trying to search for Saved by the Bell.
What?
Yeah. He was looking for an episode of Saved by the Bell.
I didn't hear that. I was like listening to the other part. Okay.
After the incident, police reportedly checked the driver's phone and concluded he'd been busily searching for a specific episode of the 90s sitcom starring Mark Paul Glazer, Mario Lopez, Tiffany Thiessen.
Mario Lopez. Yeah, he's hot.
And Dustin Diamond.
Dustin Diamond. May he rest in peace.
Yeah, Dustin didn't have very good luck after that.
Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, there you go. Quotes. Bacon was looking down at his cell phone at the time of the crash, as well as several minutes beforehand, and never saw the disabled vehicle or the marked police cruiser.
He came out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the Vermont State Police claim.
Oh.
Yeah. The police cruiser reportedly had its emergency lights flashing when Bacon hit it with his 2016 Chevrolet Spark, which he then continued to drive northbound before being pursued by the officer whose car had been hit. It
was a hit and run, too.
It was. He was out of there. The vintage sitcom enthusiast was arrested for gross negligent operation of a vehicle and leaving the scene of an accident. It's unclear which episode Bacon was looking for at the time of the incident. There you go. Bless his heart.
No, bless his heart. He was a fan. That's a super fan.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a super fan of Hitched to Homicide and you want to send us a bless your heart, you can send it to Chris at hitchedtohomicide.com, or you can go to the website. There's a little pull down menu.
Yep.
And you can bless somebody's heart.
But important safety tip, when looking for an episode of Hitched to Homicide, don't be driving
looking
down
into
at your
a police officer. Yeah, exactly. We don't want to have anything to do with that.
Yeah,
Everybody
exactly.
drive safe. Listen to the podcast, but set it up at a red light or do it before you leave your house.
Exactly.
Important safety tip.
Yep.
Well, that's all we have this week for Hitched to Homicide. That's my adorable husband over there.
And that's my even more adorable wife on that side.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.